Hi, my name is Adrian Townsend. I am a graphic designer and digital artist. The purpose of this video is just to kind of show what my process is for creating digital art. This isn't intended to be a tutorial or anything like that, just simply kind of going through my process with a time lapse and just kind of talk through what I'm doing here. So to get things started, I am working on Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. And I'm also a gamer and I enjoy playing games. And this is a remake that I'm really happy to have played and that exists. So I wanted to go ahead and do a fan art piece of Cloud from the remake. Anyway, as you can see, I've gotten started and what I'm doing here is I'm outlining Cloud, basically all of the main outline shapes of the figure before I get into any details. So what I'm looking for is outlines of I'm working on the bolts right now that come off of his shoulder pads. And I was also working on the structure of his hair, his face, and the back strap there. And then I'm going into the detail. After I've outlined everything with solid color there, I go in and start outlining some details. And again, I'm just looking for solid blocks of color. And right now I'm looking at his face and just outlining different color shades. So I'm not gonna get into any kind of blending or anything. So that's kind of the beauty of vector art, is you can go in and create just solid color shapes to blend together to create depth. And so that's what I'm doing here, is just going through and finding the darker shades of his hair now into his bracer there. His sword's a lot of fun because it's just mainly a lot of straight lines and straight angles, and it's pretty easy. So it's good change of pace from working on the different shadows and highlights that I had to with his the rest of his features there. So I enjoyed working on the sword quite a bit. So what I do is I take the pen tool and I go and trace each color, each line that I think might be beneficial to include within the full composition of the completed work. Right now I've done the darker shades of his shirt, and I'm going to come through and do the lighter shades as well. Also these kind of like he's wearing a sweater or something, so he's got all these lines going down, and you definitely got to include those because those are a big characteristic of his shirt there. So I wanted to make sure I get all of the ones there in the shade that show up pretty well, but not all the other ones. And I'm just kind of tracing with the pen tool, and this is really good practice for the pen tool, by the way. If you're not accustomed to using the pen tool, it's a very, very good tool. It definitely has a learning curve, but the amount of control that you have with your lines and your points is really beneficial for any vector work. So I highly recommend getting proficient with the pen tool. I've seen a couple of videos on YouTube. I thought about doing a tutorial on the pen tool, but I see some really good videos online. It's more about practice than anything. I also like to use a pen tablet. I've got a Wacom tablet that I use instead of a mouse. And that to me just makes things a whole lot easier. Again, that's another kind of learning curve thing. I started using it by necessity because I was getting carpal tunnel syndrome in my wrist from using a mouse. So I was looking for alternatives to help with that. And one of the things that I found was using a pen tablet. And I've been wanting to use one anyway, and it's really a great tool. It feels so natural at this point that I'm really glad that I took the time to learn it. So right here, I've gone ahead and started filling in those strokes with fills. And the reason I do this later is because I really want to get all of the main outlines that I can find first. And when I trace all those lines with the picture underneath that I'm using for reference, it helps to be able to see all those lines better. And then once I feel like I have enough lines to go in and start the detail work, then I can just slide the image off to the side, and I'll still reference the photo, but I'll go in and go ahead and start using my own imagination for where I think shadows and different details might be. I don't get overly detailed with this, but I do provide enough detail that helps create structure and depth. I'm really big fan of vector art just simply because of the simplicity of the medium. I really enjoy creating logos and the simple shapes and lines and points and manipulating those to create objects and solid colors and strokes. It's just a medium that I really appreciate and enjoy working with. The pen tool is so fun for me to use, so that's just kind of a reason to get in there and use it. So right now I'm creating some materia. There's not materia in the picture in my reference photo, but I had to throw some materia there in his sword. These little round balls here. And they're basically his magic. And so I'm tracing another piece of materia, so I plan on using this both in the sword and as like a background element piece. So this one was kind of challenging just because it had a lot of different colors in it, and it's hard to get that mystic marbly texture or effect with vector, because all of the colors blend together in the actual game. There's no real solid color, and there's such a wide range of color within it as well. I went in and laid out all of my shadows first in his clothes. I like to start off with my initial sketch. The solid color is like the middle tone color, or the mid-tone, and then I'll go in and block in all the shadows, get those good, and then another kind of secondary range between the shadows and the mid-tone, and then I'll go in and start adding the highlights. And right now you can see I'm adding some highlights as well as a little bit of those shadow mid-tones that I missed out on before. Highlights add that kind of final touch to your piece, and it's a really important thing to consider when creating something like this. When you're starting out, it's easy to miss the highlights and not include those in your composition. It's really important that you throw those in at the end. It just really adds another layer of depth. So these bolts here weren't great as far as the reference photo I was using. As you can tell, the reference photo is very pixelated, so I had to do a lot of guesswork. I did kind of get outlines and shapes that I thought looked good, but I went in and messed with it quite a bit to try to get that look that I wanted to see. And that's still, to me, it's not great. And you'll see later, I'll go in and add some highlights and stuff that really kind of set that off. Make it pop, if you will. Graphic designer, the word that graphic designers hate the most, make it pop. There we go. So adding some shadow there behind it and trying to get it. And I had to go back to the reference photo to start those over again, just because my initial line work wasn't great. I wasn't liking it. So I spent quite a bit of time on those things, obviously, and getting those correct. Yeah, going in and adding in some of those lines or those dots there. It's that rustic look he has on his shoulder pads. The shoulder pads are really cool. I had a lot of fun working on those. So I'm adding some other highlights and shadows, get some more lines there for his sweater. So working on his glove here was kind of a challenge. There's really nothing to go off of on this reference photo. So I had to try to imagine what his hand would look like back there while holding the hilt of the sword. And then I also just kind of darkened it up quite a bit because I really don't want the focus to be on his hand. Obviously it's in the background. It's not meant to have the focus. So I just did some vague shadowing back there to give the idea that there's a hand there. So with his hair, I'm just adding a little bit more mid-tone color. And I also want to work on the shape of his hair too. I didn't feel like the spikes were the spikes of his hair were really the way I wanted them to be. So I go in and rework those as well. But adding in the highlights. So I threw in the materia in the background and I'm just working with it to try to find the best composition for that. And adding some more highlights there. And his eyes specifically are really nice. And also in his face, I felt like his face was a little flat. So I decided to go in and add some more highlights there. And then finally the sword. So I play around with a few different textures here. And I just didn't, that to me looked like camo or even the materia. So I was like, nah, it doesn't really need it. I know his sword's got a lot of texture on it, but I kind of like the clean look of it and contrast with the complexity of the materia and also all the shadowing and Cloud himself. Here I decided to go back and redraw that background materia. I wasn't real happy with how it turned out, and I felt like I could do a better job with it. So I'm adding a few more layers of color. I created a few color swatches that are easy to change. So that way, if I wanted to change the color of this materia to a blue or purple or yellow or any of the different colors, I could go in and do that. And that's it. So I'm just kind of putting the final touches on here and trying to find the best composition for how I wanted it to end up. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoy what you see, please give me a subscribe. And if you would like to see the finished pieces, I post those up on Twitter and on Instagram at Bertazoid. You'll find the links in the description. I also do gaming podcasts if you're interested in checking those out. And one of them is Pixel Perspective. I do that with a friend of mine, JJ, and it's over on his channel, Game Room Revival on YouTube. But you can also find it on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you find your podcasts. And then an older podcast that I did was Just a Bit Gaming, and you can find that on YouTube. It's Just a Bit Gaming, as well as all the other audio podcast platforms of your choice. You'll be able to find them there. But thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.